Responsibility for running England's motorways and major trunk roads will be handed to private companies under plans announced by the Prime Minister today. Now, David Cameon has ordered the Department of Transport and the Treasury to investigate how they can increase the money available for the country's busiest routes and tackle congestion by putting the private sector in charge of repairing worn-out surfaces and crumbling bridges. In return, private companies taking control of the roads on long leases would receive a proportion of the £6 billion a year raised through vehicle excise duty. But motoring organisations are concerned that the existing road tax is not the only price that drivers would end up paying for private sector involvement in England's roads. They're concerned that companies will boost their profits by building new toll roads alongside existing highways, effectively creating new fast lanes for the rich and bringing in road pricing by the back door. Let's speak to Edmund King, President of the Automobile Association, and Dr. Sheila Lawlor, Director of the pro-free market think tank Politeia. Dr. Sheila Lawlor, first of all, I know broadly you support this idea.
Yes, indeed, broadly I do, but subject to the caveat that any new money brought in terms of charges or taxes must be offset on reductions for the hard-pressed motorist elsewhere, who already is finding 30 to 40 billion pounds a year. So I think it's a good idea to bring in new money and investment into the roads, but I would want politicians to give cast iron guarantees that fresh charging and investment would be offset by charges elsewhere.
Right. For example, reductions in?
Well, I would say that the standard car tax. I think we've got to look again at fuel tax and excise duties. They're bringing in 30 to 40 billion pounds a year, depending on how you measure the estimate. And of that, we really only spend a tiny fraction on the roads.
But regardless of all that, if we bring in this system, we could end up with a fast lane, could we not? We could end up with new roads being built where the new companies, the private companies who've been brought in, say, well, to ease congestion, we're going to have a super lane, but you have to pay £5 to use it. Is that fair?
Well, I think we already have charges for better services right across the transport system. If I want to go cross-country from Birmingham to Suffolk, it'll be cheaper than going via London, but I might choose to pay more and go via London for convenience or because it's quicker. There are all kinds of pricing mechanisms on air travel. You can book loads in advance and get a cheap ticket, but if you want to buy on the day, the convenience, because your plans have changed, you pay more. And I think we already accept the principle of paying more for a better service.
We do, of course we do, but aren't roads different? Because to go back to your previous point, we already pay all these additional taxes.
Yeah, we already pay, and I'd like to see much more transparency in how that money is used.
Okay, Edmund King, this is a great idea, isn't it? All those potholes, they're all going to get fixed now, aren't they?
Well, indeed, that would be good if that were the case. And, there is no doubt we need new investment in the road infrastructure. We've heard a lot recently about £30 billion going into high-speed 2 for the railways, and we haven't heard much about the roads. So it's good at least that the Prime Minister is addressing the need for infrastructure investment. I think it really comes down to how would this be done? How would it be carried out? And the Prime Minister is talking about no national tolls introduced, only tolls introduced if there's additional capacity. So in theory, that could be if you added a lane on the M1, the M6, the M5, you could toll that lane. Now, you've got that in America. They're called hot lanes or high occupancy toll lanes, whereby if you're car sharing, it's free. If you're not car sharing, you pay a toll. And it hasn't been incredibly successful in terms of the car sharing. Many people flouted it by using blow-up Ronald Reagan dolls to show that they had passengers, or UCLA students would rent themselves out to drivers so that the driver could get a fast trip through California. So it has some of its problems. I mean, we polled in November over 16,000 AA members on the use of toll lanes, and 58% opposed individual toll lanes, 21% said they would support them. But it was interesting that demographics, because the more well-off people were more likely, perhaps unsurprisingly, to support them and use them than those on lower incomes.
Right.
So,
I mean, Edmund, we are making a lot of presumptions here, though, aren't we? Because we don't know that this is necessarily what these private companies would do. I mean, we're kind of, guessing, aren't we, at this stage? That we're guessing the worst case scenario, that they're going to say, to ease congestion, we will build a lane which, if only rich people can use. But that's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that they're going to ease congestion in another way, maybe through some kind of road management systems, and they are going to plough all the money that they get back into maintaining the roads.
Well, indeed. I mean, there's a lot that can be done to make the road system much more efficient, and we support that. There was a review of the Highways Agency done in November called the Cook Review, and it talks about a 5-year plan with 5-year funding and a rolling plan, better procurement, better investment. And we support all that. Indeed, I discussed it last week with the Transport Secretary. It just seems this is going a step further than that, with comparisons with the water industry, which I perhaps don't think are particularly helpful. The privatisation of the water industry made big profits for the water companies. It didn't particularly, early on at least, help the consumer. So I think, motorists will be worried with that, even though they want and deserve better infrastructure because they pay for it many times over.
Yeah, Sheila, there will be people who agree with Edmund who are worried at the prospect of privatisation of the roads, because they look at other utility companies, for example, the water companies, and don't feel that that what was promised has materialised.
Well, I think that with regard to water, there are some very successful water companies who have ploughed back a lot more investment into leaking drains, leaking pipes and so on, and we're saving more water since the privatisation of water through wastage. However, I don't think this is a matter of privatisation. The government has only mooted a scheme for part road pricing for new roads. And this part road pricing, in fact, already exists in principle in this country. We pay for toll bridges. It costs £6 to cross the Severn, or £3 to cross the Humber. Or the Dart crossing is about £1.50, depending on what mode of transport you're on.
Well, it's interesting. Sheila. Can I just interrupt for 1 second? You said that that you feel that the some of the water companies have actually they're a very good example because they've ploughed some of the money back in. There are concerns again because some of the water companies are foreign owned, and could the same necessarily happen with companies that want to own stretches of our roads?
I think, honestly, there's a great deal to be said for bringing in a bit more competition into providing services in this country. Where government is the monopoly provider and the Highways Agency, which does its work, we can see a sign from 2009 to 2013, a certain section of road will be closed and motorists have to put up with it. I really do think that this is the beginning of trying to raise the standard of service through competition, which we haven't. Everybody suffers great inconvenience from a road up, whether it's in a town, whether it's overnight closing for work and so on. And we really need to change the way we think about roads so that the motorist will benefit. And the motorist shouldn't be stumped twice. The motorist should start seeing a reduction in the cost of road use, not an increase.
Okay, Edmund, finally, do you think that this is inevitable, that the roads are in such a state, and I know that's what a lot of people think because they get in touch with the BBC whenever we talk about this. There's so much congestion and the roads are in such a bad state that privatisation, or an element of it, Edmund, is now inevitable.
Well, yeah, we certainly need improvements, and I think there's lots that could be done by reforming the current Highways Agency, and a report indicating how that could be done is on the Transport Secretary's desk. But I think there is quite a leap from going from that to a new model of ownership and financing. I mean, currently we do a lot of this. There are long-term contracts, DBFO contracts on the M25, where a private company says they will design, build, manage and maintain a stretch of motorway. We could introduce more of that, and that's getting private money in. But there's a difference between that and adding a pay-as-you-drive lane on the M6, which I'm not sure there's an appetite for amongst drivers in general.
Well, we'll find out whether there is an appetite. Thank you very much. That is Edmund King, President of the Automobile Association. And we also heard from Dr. Sheila Lawlor, Director of the Pro-Free Market think tank.